I'm Martin Thomas, and it's Wednesday, the 15th of May, 2024. Welcome to the 7-Minute Briefing podcast, your roundup of news from the Middle East and North Africa, brought to you by Sat7. It's a sad reflection of our world that the sanctity of human life and the human rights this implies are too often honoured in the breach rather than in their keeping. This month, we highlight various reports on religious freedom, women's rights, and press freedom that impacts the lives of millions across the region. Freedom of religion and of belief is being challenged more and more. Around the world, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom declared as it launched its annual report. Among the countries it added to the list of countries of particular concern, CPCs, were Afghanistan and Azerbaijan. Other MENA states already designated as CPCs are Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Tajikistan. Examples of the threats to religious freedom came from rural Egypt last month. 2 outbreaks of anti-Christian violence were sparked by the granting of government permission for the building of new churches. In one example, Islamic extremists set fire to 7 homes owned by Coptic Orthodox Christians in a village home to 3,000 Christian families. The hostilities were prompted by the construction of an evangelical church intended to serve 2,000 worshippers from 3 local villages. Despite incidents like this, it's encouraging that authorities are working through the backlog of 3,700 requested churches and affiliated buildings that existed 10 years ago. We move on to look at women's freedoms some 18 months since the death in custody in Iran of Mahsa Amini for improper wearing of the hijab. Some courageous women continue to go bareheaded in public, prompting Ayatollah Khomeini last month to order the recruitment of a female morality police who patrol public spaces and seize women judged to be breaking the dress code. The story is not so different in Saudi Arabia. News emerged this month that Manahal Al-Ataibi, a 29-year-old blogger and fitness instructor, had been secretly sentenced to 11 years in prison for social media posts showing her head uncovered and supporting women's rights. The suppression of women's rights is linked to the increased pressures on press freedom and journalists globally. But Sat7 channels continue to broadcast powerful programs that strengthen women in the many different contexts of the region. Wakila, a young woman from Egypt, reached out to Sat7 feeling worthless because of her gender. After a gentle conversation with Sat7's viewer support team, Wakila shared, "Your words comforted me a lot and made me think of many good things about myself and good things in my life. Thank you for your time and trust, and thank you for your prayers." You're listening to the 7-Minute Briefing podcast, brought to you by Sat7. Keep an eye out for our sister podcast, Voices of the Middle East, where you can reflect more deeply on stories of faith from our viewers in the region. And join with Sat7 in prayer for the people of the Middle East and North Africa. See the links in the show notes for more details. To the Holy Land now, where recent weeks saw increasingly desperate hopes for a ceasefire, both from Gazan civilians who have been displaced multiple times and from many Israelis who long to see the return of hostages and who fear for the safety of children serving in the military. At the time of writing, some 300,000 people have fled as Israeli troops pushed on. Medical staff at Al-Najjar, the city's largest partially functioning hospital, and at a primary health clinic run by the Near East Council of Churches, both had to evacuate. Remaining hospitals are struggling with the surge of injuries. On a wider front, International Christian Concern reported that up to 3/4 of Gaza's Christian community of 1,000 believers have left or are planning to leave the enclave. Church leaders in the UK and around the world have called on the 2 nations to exercise restraint. Writing on social media, the Archbishop of Canterbury said, "I pray for the peace and security of Israel's people at this time, and I appeal to all parties both for restraint and to act for peace and mutual security. On a happier note, Open Doors reports that church bells will ring out again in Raqqa, Syria. The church buildings, once captured by so-called Islamic State, were handed back to the Christian community on the 16th of April. George McKean, Sat7's ministry content advisor, celebrated the development, saying, "The fact that people can once again rebuild their churches and ring their bells is a sign of hope to a place that has suffered so much and is still in a difficult transitional period. Sat7 is aware of the good work churches are doing in Syria. The spirit of unity is growing, and different denominations are working together to support Christian families. Churches are providing education services so that the few remaining younger people can find hope and build their future. At Sat7, we cover these developments and pray for the country." And finally, as the Middle East Council of Churches celebrates 50 years, give thanks for Sat7 joining them to help tell a different story, uniting a diverse church of different ethnicities and traditions. Pray that the celebrations will encourage and strengthen the church's witness across the region. Thank you for listening to the 7-Minute Briefing podcast from Sat7. Take a look at today's show notes to read, listen to and watch more content connected to this month's news, especially the briefing long read article, which contains an update on the ongoing and heartbreaking situation in Sudan, which we'll cover in more depth next month.